Hello and welcome to all. We are today starting the second week of the course on access to decent work for refugees and other forcibly displaced persons. This is going to be the session number 3, rights to work for refugees and labor market implications. We are welcoming our colleague from UNHCR, Denise Baruch, and also our ILO colleague Héloise Ruaudel, and we also have the help of Eliza Marks from ILO. Welcome to all. Thank you again for connecting live. We will start with the presentation of Denise, but let me introduce you, Denise, briefly. So Denise is a legal officer of the Protection Policy and Legal Advice section of the Division of International Protection at the UNHCR headquarters in Geneva. She has previously conducted research and analysis as a policy officer for UNHCR flagship publication, People Forced to Flee, History, Change and Challenge, published by Oxford University Press in February 2022. Denise has also worked with UNHCR previously in Belarus in interagency coordination for the Ukraine emergency and in Eastern Sudan in protection from trafficking in persons. Before joining UNHCR, Denise also worked for the German Red Cross, counseling asylum seekers in a first reception refugee camp in Germany. She holds a PGD in laws from the University of London, an MA from the University of Freiburg and the University of Cape Town, and a BF from the Free University of Berlin. Now, let me introduce also Héloise. So Héloise Ruaudel has over 20 years of experience at both organization headquarters and in the field in the protection of civilians and displaced populations. Expertise in refugees, forced displacement, humanitarian and development policies. Evaluation and research experience in humanitarian assistance and protection activities, including in fragile and post-conflict contexts. Policy analyst, evaluator, researcher, and project manager for a wide range of international organizations, government and ministries, non-government organizations and academic institutions, including the OECD, the World Bank, the ILO, OCHA, UNHCR. It's a long list, Héloise. The Danish, Finnish, and Swiss Ministries of Foreign Affairs, the START Network, the Norwegian Refugee Council, the Danish Refugee Council, Geneva Call, and the Refugee Studies Center at the University of Oxford. She holds a Master of Economics and Social Studies in International Politics, Aberystwyth University, Wales, UK, and Master Hons in Public Laws, Faculty of Law in Political Science, Rennes, France. So this is the presentation. We are very lucky to have 2 specialists here with us. I will share the presentation for Denise. And so over to you, Denise. Let me start the presentation, but you can start.
Thank you so much for the introduction and also for the invitation to today's session and to present on UNHCR's mandate and UNHCR's work, but also specifically on the right to decent work for refugees. So, and thank you so much for helping me with the presentation as well. So if we can maybe go to the first slide.
Is that okay? Do you see it?
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Great, thank you so much. So we will be looking today, first of all, a bit at UNHCR's mandate and its supervisory responsibility, especially for those of you who are online who might not be as familiar with the work of UNHCR. If there's any UNHCR colleagues, then this might be a bit of a repetition for you, but I hope still interesting and maybe a small refresher. We will then also be looking looking at the definition of a refugee, just to make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of the terminology that we're talking about. And then we will go quite into some detail of the legal basis and the rights to decent work for refugees. So there we will be looking specifically at human rights law and refugee law. And then in the last part of the presentation, I will give you a bit of an idea of how the right to decent work for refugees can look in practice and what can be done to help refugees in accessing decent work. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just for a little bit of history, UNHCR was established after World War II by a resolution of the UN General Assembly in 1950, and it is a subsidiary organ of the United Nations General Assembly. So UNHCR statute provides the organization with a twofold mandate. So that means first, UNHCR is to provide international protection to refugees, and this includes promoting the ratification of international conventions to protect refugees and to supervise the application of these conventions. And the second aspect of UNHCR's work is to seek durable solutions. So durable solutions include the voluntary return of refugees to the country of origin, and also their integration in the country of asylum or in a third country, for example, through resettlement or complementary pathways. And it is important to underline here that the protection of displaced persons is primarily the responsibility of states. And UNHCR steps in when the state is unable or unwilling to provide the protection for people. So UNHCR therefore carries out its protection mandate in dialogue with the concerned state. And the statute calls upon states to cooperate with UNHCR on this. And the mandate on the solutions of UNHCR also emphasizes UNHCR's facilitation role and collaboration with states in finding solutions. Next slide, please. So in principle, UNHCR's work is non-political. This means that it is impartial, it is humanitarian, and it is social. And UNHCR leads international action to protect forcibly displaced people, including through the recognition of status, to deliver life-saving support and assistance, to safeguard the fundamental human rights of forcibly displaced people, and to help develop solutions so that people forced to flee can build a better future. Next slide, please. So to understand the right to decent work for refugees, it is important to first also understand the difference between asylum seekers and refugees and to understand the terminology that we're talking about. So an asylum seeker is in general a general term for any person who is seeking international protection. And in some countries, it is used as a legal term referring to a person who has applied for international protection, but has not yet received a final decision on their claim. It can also refer, however, to a person who has not yet submitted an application, but may intend to submit an application at some point. And here it is important to know that not every asylum seeker will ultimately be recognized as a refugee, but every refugee initially is an asylum seeker. So a refugee, on the other hand, is any person who meets the eligibility criteria under an applicable refugee definition. So here it is important to note that under international law, a person is considered to be a refugee as soon as they meet the relevant criteria, whether or not they have been formally recognized as a refugee. So this is what we call the declaratory character of refugee status. So this means that a person does not become a refugee because they are recognized as a refugee, but rather they are recognized because they are a refugee. So they are declared to be a refugee. And this is important because Asylum seekers are therefore to be treated as if they are refugees until it is determined that they are not. So this is particularly important, for example, for the protection from refoulement. But this does not mean, however, that asylum seekers must have access to all rights in the 1951 Convention immediately. And this is because access to the rights under the 1951 Convention is relative in two ways. And what I mean with this, that the rights are relative, we will see later when we look at the example of decent work, but just for you to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So, who is a refugee? There are various instruments that define who is a refugee. So, the primary instrument that you might be familiar with is the 1951 Convention and its 1967 Protocol. So, under the definition of the Convention and the Protocol, a refugee is a person who, due to a well-founded fear of persecution, for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside of the country of origin and is unable or unwilling to avail themselves of the protection of that country. Next slide, please. So in addition in that, regional instruments such as the 1969 OAU Convention in Africa and the 1984 Cartagena Declaration in the Americas have built upon the definition of the 1951 Convention that we have just seen. So as we saw, the refugee definition of the 1951 Convention is focused on the risks of individual persecution. And the broader refugee criteria in the regional instruments is focused on what we call risks that are coming from objective circumstances. So the definition of the 1969 OAU Convention includes the definition of the 1951 Convention, but then in addition to that also external aggression, occupation, foreign domination, or events seriously disturbing public order. And the definition of the 1984 Cartagena Declaration also includes generalized violence, foreign aggression, internal conflicts, massive violations of human rights, or other circumstances which have seriously disturbed public order. So, in short and in general, after having seen these definitions, we can say that refugees are all persons who are outside their country of origin for reasons of feared persecution, or generalized violence, or other circumstances that have seriously disturbed public order, and who, as a result, require international protection. But it is important to note here, that's also important for the topic we're talking about today, that every refugee, regardless of the definition under which they are recognized, enjoys the same rights under international law. So in terms of the rights, there should not be a difference under which definition the refugee has been recognized. Next slide, please. So we're moving then, like I said, a bit more into the legal details on the right to work. So under international law, the right to work is set out expressly in Article 23 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in Article 6 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the ICESCR. So under the ICESCR, state parties require to take progressive steps to realize for everyone within their jurisdiction, including refugees, the opportunity to gain a living by work that is freely chosen or accepted. And states must do so in a non-discriminatory manner. However, the right to work does not include a guarantee for a job, but rather the right is to access the labor market. So, for example, every person is legally entitled to seek wage-earning employment or start a business and produce and sell goods and services. Also, a person cannot be forced to engage in employment or be unfairly dismissed from it. And forced or compulsory labor is explicitly prohibited, and so are also the worst forms of child labor prohibited because they interfere with the child's development. Next slide, please. So the right to work of refugees, or to access employment, I should say, actually for refugees, is explicitly recognized in the 1951 Convention. And these are Article 17 on wage earning on employment in the left column, Article 18 on self-employment in the center column, and Article 19 on liberal professions on the right column. In case you're wondering, liberal professions means a profession for which diplomas and qualifications are required and that can be organized and carried out independently. So, for example, lawyers or physicians or architects, engineers and artists. And as I have mentioned earlier, access to rights under the 1951 Convention is relative in two ways. So it means it depends on two factors. And this is where it gets a little complicated, but I'll see if I can break it down for you to understand a bit the complexities around it. So we say the rights depend on two factors. So the first one is that the access to rights depends on the presence or the legal status of the person in the host country. So this could mean in a simplified manner, whether the person is a recognized refugee or an asylum seeker in the country. So the language that the convention uses is actually lawfully staying or lawfully in the country. So for asylum seekers who are lawfully in the country, they may access self-employment opportunities, as you see in the center column. And refugees, like recognized refugees who are lawfully staying in the country, may also access wage earning employment on the left side, and also practice liberal professions on the right. So there is some distinction that the convention makes between asylum seekers and recognized refugees. And then refugee rights also depend on the level how others in the country are treated by law. So either how are the nationals treated by law and how are other non-nationals treated by law. So access to wage earning employment on the left side should be the same as the best treatment that other non-nationals can receive under law. So just to give you an example, to make it a bit more practical, for example, in countries that have treaties in place that allow access to the labor market for nationals of certain states. So, for example, these could be the regional economic communities that exist in some regions in Africa. Refugees must have then the same access to the labor market as the nationals of these states, because this would be the best treatment that a non-national can have under a national law. And then it's also important to note that after 3 years of residence in the country, refugees must be provided with the same access to the labor market as nationals. Regarding access to self-employment, the center column, and liberal professions, the column on the right, the access should be as good as possible, but at least the same treatment as for foreigners who are generally in the same circumstances in the country. So this means that in that case, states are encouraged to ensure that refugees receive the best treatment that other non-nationals receive, but in any event, they cannot be treated worse than other non-nationals. So that level is a little bit lower, as you can see, than for the wage earning employment. That all sounds a bit complicated. I know it's not as straightforward as sometimes people might believe, but what I think is very important here to remember, and that's kind of the key message, is that the access to wage earning employment for refugees increases incrementally according to the presence or residence and the length of the stay in the host country. So that's basically the idea behind the structure, that the access to employment increases incrementally depending on how long a person is in the country, and also how the level of attachment to the country is increasing. Could we move to the next slide, please? Right. So we always speak about decent work, and why is that? It's because refugees, or generally all human beings, do not only have a right to work, but also to decent work. So this means that decent work involves the just and favorable conditions of work, as well as access to social security. And these rights are also guaranteed in the ICESCR. So this may include work that delivers a fair income, security in the workplace, paid rest, social protection for families, etc. And decent work is fundamental to people's resilience and self-reliance, and benefits both refugees and also the host community, and enhances the prospects for durable solutions for refugees. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the 1951 also explicitly provides for the right to social protection for refugees. So recognized refugees who are lawfully staying in the country must be treated like nationals regarding the conditions of work, the social security benefits, and the provision of public relief. So this is Article 24 of the 1951 Convention, and also Article 23. So these articles, together with the previous articles that we have seen on the right to work, the 1951 Convention ensures the right to decent work for refugees. So these articles work together in ensuring a decent work for refugees. So here, the key message important to remember is that recognized refugees lawfully staying in the country must benefit from the same social protection as nationals. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So it's also important to note that international refugee law and international human rights law are complementary. So this means that the rights in the 1951 Convention are to be read together with the rights contained in international human rights law. So just to give you an example, where states, for example, maintain a reservation to any of the decent work articles of the 1951 Convention, the ICESCR and the international labor standards still provide for decent work for refugees. So these rights are guaranteed under human rights law, even if there are any restrictions under the 1951 Convention. And it's also important to note that several other rights enable the realization of decent work for refugees. So very important, for example, is the principle of non-discrimination, but also the right to form and join trade unions and labor associations. Of course, the freedom of movement in the country of asylum, to be able to access, for example, employment opportunities or also education opportunities. Also the possibility to receive identity, civil and travel documents, to be able to access training and education opportunities, also to safeguard intellectual property rights, and to have access to effective remedies and courts to claim your rights. Next slide, please. So, yes, so as we have seen, states are allowed to differentiate between its nationals and refugees and asylum seekers, and to gradually facilitate refugees' access to decent work. And these policies can be reasonable, for example, due to limited availability of resources, capacity constraints, as well as certain needs and priorities of the host country. However, it is important to note that refugees' access to decent work is essential to the achievement of self-reliance of refugees. And studies have also shown that refugees' access to decent work generally benefits the host communities and the domestic economy. And refugees left without opportunities to earn an income will likely rely on the payment of social assistance or humanitarian assistance. So to realize the opportunities of refugees to access decent work, states are required to take deliberate, concrete, and targeted steps. So these include adopting legislative, administrative, and financial measures to develop training programs and policies. Also to develop national employment policies, and also ensuring that relevant legislation and other measures are in place to ensure access to decent work and to allocate the available resources for that. And importantly as well, the international community as a whole, including humanitarian and development actors, need to show solidarity and offer assistance and cooperation to help states provide access to decent work for all, including refugees. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the question now, of course, is how can this be done? Especially considering that 75% of the world's refugees are hosted in low and middle income countries. And this is not new, the fact that the majority of refugees are hosted in low and middle income countries, but it needs to be kept in mind when looking at the right to decent work. So UNHCR, for one, is developing a tool which will analyze the rights of refugees in every country, including the right to decent work. So this tool is called the Rights Mapping and Analysis Platform, or short REMAP. It is a digital platform that is designed to provide information about laws and policies relating to the rights of refugees, and it will help for example, researchers or organizations, international organizations, or also states to analyze the rights provided in each country and to also identify gaps and opportunities to encourage law reform and to encourage the inclusion in national systems of refugees. So like I said, this tool is currently under development. It is not fully accessible yet for the public. However, it will become available towards the end of the year. And there are two current features of REMAP that are already available. One is the Refugee Treaty and Legislation Dashboard, and the other is the IDP Law and Policy Dashboard. So why I'm highlighting this to you is in case you're interested to find out more about especially the 1951 Convention, the 67 Protocol, and also the regional instruments, and to understand which countries are state parties to these instruments, and maybe to also understand a bit better the framework that applies in the country where you're working. You can access this dashboard and, for example, then also see which states are maintaining reservations to the articles of the 51 Convention and the Protocol. And here we can see, for example, I put one chart in the presentation that the largest number of reservations by states are actually made to Article 17 on wage earning employment of refugees, and also on Article 24 on social protection, as we saw earlier. So there's definitely room for advocacy and improvement in that area. Next slide, please. So you might have also heard about the Global Compact on Refugees, which also intends to support the work on finding solutions for refugees. So the 1951 Convention recognizes that asylum may place heavy burdens on countries and that international cooperation is needed to address these burdens in securing the protection of refugees and finding solutions. So the Global Compact on Refugees, which was affirmed by the UNGA in 2019, represents the political will and the ambition of the international community to strengthen cooperation and solidarity. And it is a framework for more predictable and equitable responsibility sharing. And it has four main objectives. One is to ease pressure on the host countries, to enhance the refugee self-reliance, and to expand access to third country solutions and support the conditions in countries of origin for the return in safety and in dignity. Next slide, please. And the GCR has also established, importantly, the Global Refugee Forum, the GRF, which is the world's largest international gathering of on refugees, designed to support the practical implementation of the objectives set by the Global Compact. So in December 2023, the second GRF took place in Geneva. With 4,200 participants and also a large online participation, and over 300 delegates who were refugee delegates who have participated as well in the GRF. And importantly, more than 1,700 pledges were made at the last GRF. For our topic that we're discussing here, and is particularly interesting to see that 1 in 4 pledges address economic inclusion and social protection. So what was new about the Global Refugee Forum in 2023 is that a variety of stakeholders, like states, international organizations, development actors, civil society, etc., have come together in what we call multi-stakeholder pledges to achieve the greatest impact possible and to kind of move the needle on particularly important thematic issues. So if we go to the next slide, please, you will see one example is the multi-stakeholder pledge on economic inclusion and social protection, which I believe my colleague Nada has also mentioned to you already. But just to remind you that this is an initiative to encourage high-quality pledges in the areas of law and policy reform, programming, and data and evidence on economic inclusion and social protection. And under this particular multi-stakeholder pledge, about 270 pledges were submitted. And now in the follow-up to the GRF and the lead up to the next one, these stakeholders are working together to support the implementation of the pledges and to help the states who have pledged in taking deliberate and concrete steps to realize the opportunities for refugees to access decent work. And then the next slide, please. So this was probably a lot of information, but I thought it would be helpful to summarize for you in 6 points what I think are like the key messages that are important to remember before we go into the discussion. So as I have mentioned before, refugees' access to decent work is essential to their achievement of self-reliance. Access to wage-earning employment for refugees increases incrementally according to the presence, residence, and length of stay in the host country. Refugees must benefit from the same social protection as nationals. Refugee law and international human rights law are complementary, and other rights enable the access of refugees to decent work. And states are required to take deliberate, concrete, and targeted steps to provide access to decent work for refugees. And the GRF has created a mechanism to support states through multi-stakeholder engagement. Thanks so much. And I'll be happy to take some questions or to hear some comments, or also to hear from your experience in the context where you work and your reflections on the issue of decent work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. I think perhaps Anna, you might have a question. I see you have turned your camera on.
Yes, hello everybody. Basically, I heavily relied, so to say, and read a lot about the Global Refugee Forum when I prepared one of my tasks at my previous studies. My question in this period from the time when the Global Refugee Forum happened until today, are there already any success of implementation of all these steps that were mentioned? For example, the last one, so how those stakeholders are working together to achieve any of the mentioned objectives? Thank you very much.
Do you want me to respond immediately, or we want to collect a couple of questions?
I think you can answer
Okay,
because
great.
we don't have raised hand now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so on the GRF, that is a good question. So just to say that it's been now a year and a half, I think, since the GRF. Am I not mistaken? Yeah. So basically what is happening right now is the follow-up to the pledges. So, and there will be taking place in December a high levels officials meeting, which is basically the halfway between one GRF and the next. And there the objective is to take stock of the pledges and the implementation, and to see what has been achieved so far and what is needed to continue towards the next GRF. So right now we're very much in the process of following up with states, following up with the stakeholders, and to see what is it that they have done so far and how far have they come and what else is needed to encourage the implementation of these pledges. So just to give you a couple of examples, one of the or some of the pledges that I am following specifically as well are pledges on reforming the asylum laws of some of the countries. So there we have already seen some developments of states that have started the legislative processes on the reform of the asylum law, for example. But some of these processes, especially when it comes to law and policy, and I'll just speak to that because that is my area of responsibility, not so much the operational part. But on the law and policy implementation, of course, it is also quite a lengthy process. So this is often something that does not happen from 1 month to another, but really something that depends also on political processes and that takes some time. So I think there it is really important not only for UNHCR to follow up and to encourage these law reforms, but also to have the other stakeholders involved, like I mentioned, especially also development actors or other international organizations and civil society and refugees themselves to get involved in these processes and really encourage the follow-up to the pledges. What I can do, there is a page available if you're interested in details for the GRF. There's a dashboard on the page where the process of the implementation is being tracked. So there are statistics available for each pledge where the pledging entity has to report whether they have already taken action or not. So maybe we can put that in the chat for you if I find out how to put it in the chat.
Thank you. If you find out, otherwise, if you send it to me by email, I will then put it on the eCampus. Don't worry. We have Lucy ready for another question. And then Héloise wanted to add something, I think. Lucy, over to you. You can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Denise. This is a really comprehensive and easy to understand walkthrough of the law. So thank you very much for that. I feel like I have a sense of it, but now I really understand the different stages. My question relates to the Global Refugee Forum and the pledge. I saw a lot of civil society organisations, the UN, but I didn't see any actual private sector organisations. And I was just interested to know whether they were actually there or not. And whether that was something that might change for the next one.
We
don't hear
yes.
Denise.
Yes, sorry. I was looking for the right button. Apologies. I did just put the link in the chat, so you can take a look there. On the private sector, yes, they were actually there. Again, not my area of expertise, but I do know for a fact that there have been quite some pledges made by the private sector. I know, for example, that IKEA is very active in this area, but I think also Uniqlo and a few others. So I believe if you look at the dashboard of the GRF, there's the possibility to filter by pledging entity. So there you can find if you're interested in a specific entity or a specific, a stakeholder, to see what are the pledges that they have made and how they are engaging. But maybe Héloise would also like to add something on the GRF because we've been working on that together.
Yes,
as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just maybe to complement and to respond to the first question and also to Lucy's point. Okay, so indeed many pledges, and I think now the focus has really been on the GRF, but I think it's also important to realize that when we think about this theme, we need to look at also the countries who have not made pledges in terms of, encouraging law reforms, etc. Because we see one thing that I think we've observed by analyzing the pledges is that there is some geographical imbalance. I mean, you would find when we focus, on the area of, broadening access to the labor market, decent work, you will find more pledges, whether it's from well, especially states, but also organizations that are working in those countries much more from, let's say, East Africa, Latin America, Europe. But then if you turn to the Middle East already, there's less and much less in Asia. So I wanted to highlight that. I think from, the first Global Refugee Forum in 2019 to the second Global Refugee Forum 2023, there's been some interesting trends. I mean, the growing interest in the process was definitely confirmed, and I think UNHCR was successful in attracting a wider range of stakeholders. I mean, refugees themselves were much more involved, but indeed the private sectors. So I think overall, yes, maybe civil society are more visible, but I remember the High Commissioner being, stating very clearly at the end of the GRF how the involvement of the private sector has been significant. And on ILO side, we've also, engaged with the representative of employers organizations as well as representative of trade unions to involve them in the GRF. And in fact, I mean, I think it would be great to indeed see in the third GRF much more involvement from their part. But from the first to the second, there was already some significant progress. I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you to both of you. We have a last question from Ashna from Nepal. I'm not sure she can. Okay, and then perhaps the last with Anna, and then we'll go to your presentation, Héloise. Over to you, Ashna.
Thank you. If I open my video, my voice might break, so I'm just trying to make it clear. So
It's
is it
good.
okay
We
if I
can hear
close the video?
you better than last time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Denise, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really detailed. And I just had a question. You had mentioned about the non-discriminatory role of each government in providing equal opportunities in national labor market. So I just wanted to know if you could briefly mention about the efforts of international development partners to small economy who are badly suffering from refugee problem.
Denise, would you like to answer now, or we take the other question from Anna?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm unfortunately the right person to answer a question, particularly on the development partners, mostly because it's not so much my area of expertise on the work and the collaboration with development partners. So, but maybe I'm not understanding well the question.
Or perhaps, Héloise, do you have an input on the?
Yeah, or perhaps we can take, if she doesn't mind, we can maybe take that question after my presentation,
Okay.
because I will address the question maybe of the question on
indeed.
discrimination.
Okay.
So
Very
we can
good
maybe
idea.
go back.
Okay, thank you. So Anna, did you have a last comment you wanted to make? Thank you.
Just a short question. During the Global Refugee Forum 2023, it was said that the Global Sponsorship Fund for 3 million of refugees will be created. So has it been established, this fund, and is it functioning already, or again the assessment will be only in December? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Also on that one, I have to say I wouldn't know. Because anything related to funding and specific funds, I would say, pledged at the Global Refugee Forum would be sitting in a different part of UNHCR. I'm really sorry about this, that we're so, we're working in different divisions and do not necessarily know, so well what the other division has been working on or following up on. So on that one, I'm sorry, I would not be able to answer it immediately.
Yeah, fine. So thank you very much.
So I would say if Héloise is ready, you can perhaps share your presentation, and we'll take the question of Ashna again at the end of your presentation. So we see the presentation. It's okay, perfect. Thank you. Over to you.
Yes, and I just unmuted myself. Okay. Thank you, Marion, and thank you again, Denise, for, as always, a super comprehensive presentation. Okay. I can't move. Okay, here we are. Okay, so briefly again, like Dennis also did, I will just take you through what I will highlight. So I will go back to some of the challenge of specifically zooming on the question of inequality that are experienced by refugees and forcibly displaced persons. And then I will also take you through, again, the global refugee policy. I mean, we've already touched on the Global Refugee Forum, so I will try not to duplicate what Dennis did, but I want to, I guess our presentation, as we focus on the normative side, but a lot of that is also about politics and policies, and I think it's important to sort of bring the two together for this discussion. And then I will specifically focus on the ILO's role, our mandate, our approach in facilitating labor market inclusions of refugees and other forcibly displaced persons. Okay, so let's go, as I say, back to some of the inequality faced. I mean, some of those points were already raised in the discussion you had with Roger and Nada last week, and even during the very first inaugural webinar. You may remember the sort of Slido questionnaire for Miki, and there was a question already about trying to identify some of the challenges. So Denise explained the process, who is a refugee and the related process when it comes to refugee status determination. And that's really important because if the process is long, if there is a long backlog, then it really creates protection challenges. And if refugees are not documented in some countries, there may be some repressive measures in place. And obviously, this will have a direct impact on their ability to access the labor markets. Quite central is the whole legislative policy regulatory restriction on the right to work. We focus on the rights itself, but the process can be very heavy. It can be costly, especially in many countries, refugees will need to have a work permit as other non-nationals. And so to obtain it and to renew it can be a long and difficult process. Some sectors may be proscribed for refugees in some countries. And then in a number of countries, I would say, especially in the Middle East, but not only, once employed, there can be dependencies from refugees to their employer. So moving from one job to another is certainly not a given. To access a job, or even more to become self-employed, accessing finance is essential, and there can here again be some restrictions. Also to join cooperative, which is a very interesting mean to join the labor market. I think it's essential that we also link that to restrictions that exist still in many countries when it comes to freedom of movement. Roger highlighted in his presentation earlier this last week, highlighted the fact that the majority of refugees are now in more urban settings, specifically because there is greater access to employment, but it's not the case for all, and some countries still have a strict policy either for refugees to remain in camps or to remain in settlements that can be in remote areas far from economic activities. And then importantly, there are specific limitations when it comes to rights at work. So, there's the right to work, to access the labor market, and then there are the rights that you have once you're working. And typically, there are limitations when it comes to joining a trade union, to forming a trade union even more, and to access work-related justice. This is a question we're actually currently trying to find more information on, and it's what we're observing is really overwhelmingly a lot of limitations when it comes to that topic. And then there are exclusions and restrictions when it comes to social protections coverage, but also accessing skills, qualification recognitions, mechanism, training opportunities. And a lot of this is also related to significant knowledge gaps about refugees' rights from the part of the employers, trade unions, organizations, but also obviously the refugees themselves, and the language barrier can be one additional difficulty to face. And when it comes to social partners, yes, it's the question about knowledge, but it's also a question of limited engagement that we're still observing. Okay, so we've started to look at the impacts on refugees, but I think it's also important to expand and to also look at some of the impacts on the labor markets, on host communities, and consider the fact that host countries may face pre-existing labor market challenges, including high unemployment rate, restricted and informal markets. So labor markets may struggle to absorb sudden large numbers of new workers. Some of them may have complex needs. But I think it's also important, and this again was highlighted by both Nada and Roger, that we don't look at the negative side, but also the positive impact that refugee can have in bringing new skills and filling labor gaps. Nevertheless, we can observe in some contexts competitions between refugees, migrants, and host worker, often, in sort of impoverished host communities, and this can create tensions. And that's why it's really essential to try to address that and focus on the means to ensure social cohesion. And usually, actually, whereas the question of access to employment can be the thing that create the tension, it is also the solution, because by providing access to more people and to different groups that coexist, that's also how I mean to ensure social cohesion. A big challenge that was already mentioned is, the fact that the overwhelming majority of refugees are in the informal economy, low-skilled and under-regulated sectors. And this creates decent work deficit, discrimination, exploitation, especially for women and for persons with disabilities who can face greater challenges and stigma. So without access to the labor market due to restriction, and with the declining humanitarian aid, refugees face a high risk of falling into poverty, and this can lead to increased vulnerability, including food insecurity. So sorry, it's rather a bleak picture, but there are nevertheless solutions, as we have already touched upon, and we will continue to do in the course. Okay. Here I won't take you through all the points on this chart, but I just wanted to highlight Denise mentioned the Global Compact on Refugees, the Global Refugee Forum. I think it's interesting to look at the events and the way things have evolved a little bit from a chronological point of view, and really starting around 2014 when the Syrian crisis created that large-scale displacement and, sort of perceived migration flows towards Europe border, because it was really the moment which sort of created that policy shift in the approach from a more humanitarian approach to the longer term vision of addressing displacement. And going back to the comment of the colleagues before, that's also really when some of the development actors became much more involved. And what I also really want to highlight is, because what we're observed is, as Roger highlighted, is not only the increasing scale, it's the protracted nature of displacement and the limitation of the humanitarian approach indeed. And therefore, the question of self-reliance and access to the labor market became much more central, and is actually mentioned in the Global Compact, and has been quite a key feature of some of the objectives of the GRF and some of the priorities. I think it's important to look at what's also coming. Denise mentioned the high-level officials meeting at the end of the year, and as I say, a key priority remains enhancing self-reliance through systems strengthening for inclusion and economic inclusion specifically. Obviously, we are at a time of turmoil, notably, what will be the impact of the regime change in Syria. There are some returns, but I think the continuation of protracted displacement is the trend we can still expect. There are implications to the tightening migration policies by the US governments and other states. This has clear implications on different types of movements, including on forced displacement, and how countries are either welcoming, have more welcoming policies, or on the contrary, more restrictive policies. But we must look forward with optimism, hopefully still, and look forward towards the third Global Refugee Forum, which will be at the end of 2027. Okay, so let me now turn to the ILO, and just to highlight that the ILO has a constitutional mandate to protect migrants and refugee workers. So I won't do a sort of full history of the ILO, but it's one of the oldest UN organizations, and it has engaged in labor aspects of refugee response since its inception in 1919, and indeed to address the labor market dimension of the huge displacement caused by the world wars. So the ILO constitutions and the Declaration of Philadelphia, which upholds social justice mandates, emphasize the protection of workers' interest, including those employed in countries other than their own, and that extends to refugees and other forcibly displaced people. It's important to highlight that all international labor standards are applicable to all workers, and this irrespective of nationalities or immigration status, unless otherwise stated. the ILO is very much a normative organization, as some of you may know. It has adopted 191 conventions, 6 protocols, 208 recommendations, and these are setting out basic principles and rights at work in a wide range of areas that are relevant to refugee workers, such as employment policy, social security. Some of those instruments are also considering workers in particular sectors where refugees may be also employed, such as construction, agriculture, domestic work. The ILO also has a unique supervisory system that helps to ensure that countries implement the convention that they ratified and their associated protocols. And I also wanted to emphasize that this inclusive approach is reaffirmed in some key ILO's declaration, notably the one on fundamental principles and rights at work, which you will actually go into deeper in a future session. The one on social justice and fair globalization, and the ILO Centenary Declaration as well. Right. So I said earlier that all international labor standards apply to all workers. Having said that, there is no ILO standards that are exclusively dedicated to refugees or other forcibly displaced persons. But there are ILO standards and guidance that are specifically protecting migrant workers and refugees. So I hope you understand that nuance between no dedicated instrument versus instruments that are making specifically, specific reference to these populations. And I will mention them. They're the Migration for Employment Convention and related recommendation, the Migrant Workers Convention and recommendation. So, Denise said earlier, what is a migrant, where is a refugee? But here, for ILO, it's not that we consider that refugees are migrant, but the term in some of the instruments will cover refugees, and there are specific reference to refugees also in those instruments. And then two other instruments where I would like to spend more time on: the Decent Work for Employment for Peace and Resilience recommendation. And so this time it's not an international labor standard, but it's ILO's guiding principle on the access of refugees and other forcibly displaced persons to labor markets. I already mentioned it in the introduction session because it's really the core guidance for the development of this course. It's also really the document that sort of would guide ILO's work when working in refugee and other forced displacement contexts. So let me say just a little bit more about the first instrument, which we do refer to as Recommendation 205. So it's the only ILO standard that was adopted by the International Labour Conference, that is sort of our highest official tripartite gathering, which address employment and other world of work issues in crisis situations arising from both conflict and disasters. So it's a landmark instrument for situations that are really at the crossroads of humanitarian, peace building, disaster response, and development initiatives. There is a specific chapter that focuses on refugees, returnees, which very much build on the guiding principles. The document also specifically refers to IDPs. And yeah, it's currently going through what we call a general survey, which means that there is an analysis of how the instrument has been used, and this will be proving quite useful in terms of, using it in the future. I would actually be interested during the discussion to hear from the participants whether you've heard about this recommendation or about the guiding principle before joining the course in your work. So the guiding principles, I already have said in the introduction session that it's a non-binding guidance. So in that sense, it's different from what a convention or a protocol would be, which is a binding instrument. But the fact that it's non-binding offers, has also added value of being flexible, and states can and other actors can engage easily with it. But even if it's non-binding, it's very much grounded on international labor standards, and its main objective was really to address the need for more equitable responsibility sharing with countries that were impacted by large displacement, to support states in considering access of this population to the labor market while balancing the needs and exploitation of their own citizens. I mean, in the ILO, there's a lot of focus on the host community, on the localized response, but to also assist with the creation of decent and productive jobs and strengthening labor market institutions and program. So really central to the guiding principle is how access to decent work is an integral part of sustainable response strategy. So it's really a holistic instrument that addresses what kind of is the little bit the structure of your course. So zooming on the governance framework on access to labor markets, economic employment policies for inclusive labor markets, labor rights, equality of opportunity and treatment, and then a sort of the cross-cutting issue around the partnership, the coordination and coherence, which is essential for this to move. I think we've really observed that if responses are very siloed, somewhere along the line it blocks. It's also an instrument that's looking at the entire cycle of displacement. So was there is even in this course, there is a big focus on what is happening when refugees are in the country of asylum. It is important to look at the question of voluntary repatriation and the labor market reintegration of returnees. And it's not necessarily something that happens only once refugees are back. It is something that can be also very much prepared when people are still in the country of asylum, by considering the questions of, their skills recognition and skills development, and of course their access to labor market. Because if they have not worked for years and decades, you can imagine that the labor market reintegration in any country would be compromised. And when I say any countries, I also mean potentially third countries. So the guiding principles is also considering the question of additional pathways for labor market mobility. There is a third guidance, which I also wanted to highlight. It was adopted actually the same year as the guiding principle in 2016, and it's ILO's general principles on operation and operational guidance on fair recruitment and definition of recruitment fees and related costs. And whereas this instrument has been used so far a lot more in more classical labor migration context, it actually really applies to all workers, whether nationals, but also indeed to refugees. And there are two principles in this document, 12 and 12.1, that focuses on the question of respect of human rights and the promotion of fair recruitment in conflict and crisis situations. And this is very much quite a key and significant program for the ILO. We have what we call the Fair Recruitment Initiative. Maybe Eliza can share some links in the chat. And the new strategy will really we intend to pay increased attention on how refugees do access the labor market, and also ensuring their fair recruitment. We already know that this can help to notably to address the risk of trafficking and forced laborers, and that forcibly displaced persons, refugees, are particularly exposed to this risk. Okay, so just a word on ILO's approach. Well, it's very much grounded on decent work for both, as I said, displaced population, but also host countries. And we really try to focus on reducing vulnerabilities, enabling rights, ensuring social protection, inclusion, and promoting durable solutions. And the how is through really a holistic approach, a wide range of measures. So job creation is obviously key, but skill recognitions, extension of social protections, already mentioned the formalization, which can be a gradual and a process that takes a lot of time and efforts. The capacity building of labor market institutions, the promotion of social dialogue, and ultimately our aim is really towards social justice for all. So I would say we work through three pillars. So enhancing the governance of labor market access and decent work, which is what we've been focusing on a little bit more today. But to bolster the enforcement of rights related to decent work, promote the transition to the formal economy, expand opportunities for employment, skills development, lifelong learning, income generation. And yes, we really see decent work as sort of within that nexus of humanitarian aid, development, cooperation. And I think it's important to also keep in mind the potential peace building component of decent work. And I just wanted to finish by highlighting for us the importance of the partnership, and especially in this case the partnership with UNHCR. We really feel that we have complementary mandates and expertise when it comes to supporting forcibly displaced persons' access to the labor market and decent work conditions, and supporting the community that hosts them. Our collaborative action is guided by an MOU that was signed in 2016. As you can see, the ILO was very busy in 2016. And we've been working through, we have been having successive joint action plans. There is a current one, which is still covering the period 2023-2025. And just about 10 days or so before the start of the course, we released a new update about our partnership, which very much highlights how we work jointly at the global, regional, and country level in many countries, and also across a wide range of thematic areas. So I would invite you. I think I don't know if Marion, if it has already been posted on the campus, but I will very much invite the participants to look at this new brochure that was recently released. Okay, I will stop here and looking forward to the discussion, both on my presentation and if there are still follow-up questions to Dennis' presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Héloise. A lot of materials and references there also. Denise, do you want to add a word also while we see if there are some questions from the group?
Not necessarily, just to mention that I quickly looked into Anna's question in case it got buried in the chat on the Global Sponsorship Fund, and I found some information on it that it's related to the multi-stakeholder pledge and community sponsorship. So I put the links in the chat to not leave that question fully unanswered. So I hope that is helpful.
Yes, thank you. And we will also have a session at the end of the course with one of your colleagues, which I think also would be helpful on that issue. But I see Anna has a question for Héloise in any case. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much. So my question is a little bit maybe specific because Héloise mentioned that most of the refugees are low qualified, and therefore the major policy is developed mainly for the low qualified refugees. But like what I have observed, especially here in Switzerland, that there are no policies for the higher qualified refugees. Like when, for example, a higher qualified refugee approaches the authorities really do not have policies how to help them. And then if we are speaking about also all this like combination of returning policies, then if to imagine that the high qualified refugee, while he or she is a refugee in a certain country, can obtain and improve certain skills, then these skills could be important only also when refugee returns. But because there are no policies like how to temporary or somehow integrate those refugees into the decent works, so then it means that they are not really accessing any, so to say, good skills. Because what, like with my, for example, discussion with different authorities, they just told, okay, like we have just 10% maybe high qualified refugees here in Switzerland, and so they should deal on their own, because like our major policy is to integrate, so for example they can go to the lower work. So maybe some of your reflections from this. And another part of my question, so I also last Friday participated in UNHCR so presentation on the employment platform for refugees, and then when you shared the link there about those platforms created in different countries, for example, I looked at the platform in the UK, and those jobs that were advertised there, they proposed quite low wages in comparison with the wages that you find on a so to say normal platform. Does it mean that there is still, so to say, a discrimination, that on the one hand those organizations who are ready to employ refugees, they are ready only on the conditions that they pay less to those refugees? So just to hear your reflections. Thank you very much, and sorry for such a long talk.
No, this is really, you're raising some really interesting and important points. I will let Denise respond maybe to the second part of the question, because it was related to a UNHCR event and platforms. The question of platform is actually something that Nada mentioned in her presentation last week. I do recall. Anna, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, first there is, a tendency still by some people to maybe think about refugees as a block, and of course you have refugees with so many different profiles, whether it's age and work profiles. And it is certainly correct that one thing that is observed, I think, in many contexts, there may be some exceptions, but I think it's really the general trend, is that the refugees who are more highly qualified and who brings more high level skills, in many contexts, to access employment, they will go for a lower skilled job. It's very unusual that a doctor is arriving somewhere and is able to take a job as a doctor. And you can observe, in some countries, taxi drivers who have, very, very high diplomas. And so there, I mean, I think sadly, it is a reality. And I guess that for refugees with lower skills, they may start low, but they can't. I mean, either they are not employed at all, but they can't. There's that threshold. So that's why there's that kind of tendency to take everyone down, and in a way, it's affecting the refugees who are more skilled more. But it is certainly something. I mean, in the ILO. There's an entire branch that is, looking at the question of skills. It is, for our constituents, for our employers, or representatives, especially, it is a key. The question of skills is really often a sort of top priority, whether we talk about labor migrations or anything. So it is certainly a priority area of the ILO. There's a lot of focus on recognitions of diploma, and because that's often the problem is, you arrive in a context and but first you may not have your diploma, you may and it may not be recognized. So that's where it blocks. So there's a lot of attention is paid to that, and is paid to upskilling and trying to break that mismatch that I mentioned earlier between the how skilled the person may be versus the job that they may take in the first place, and that can be a process that it's unusual that there is an immediate solution. It can take. It's a process, yeah. It can take a number of years and a number of steps, but it's I think it's definitely a priority areas. It's something we can work closely with the training institutions, and in fact, looking at, we mentioned the GRF and the pledges, and there is a specific pledge that is related to that. I just realized that I forgot actually to show my last slide, which was about the ILO's commitment in the GRF, and and actually one of the pledge where we are partnering with UNHCR is very much on that. We have a joint pledge on technical and vocational and education training, which also target that sort of move towards higher education. And so maybe over to Denise to respond if she can to the more specific question on the platform.
Thanks. Maybe first on the first question on the higher skilled work versus lower skilled work, and I think Héloise also just mentioned it briefly. One issue that is often occurs is the problem of recognition of certificates and diplomas. So, and there is actually also in a provision on that under the 1951 Convention that does mention specifically the recognition of diplomas under Article 22 2, I think it is, when it comes to higher education and also to be able to access further skills. And I think here it is, and that probably goes actually beyond the question of refugees, but also generally labor migration, I would say, where some countries need to find solutions to provide to make the access to the labor market, like to basically facilitate the access to the labor market for people who want to access and who have the skills. And if there's any difficulties in accessing the labor markets, to see how to unlock these problems. And I know, just kind of from a little bit from my own background from Germany, that these are often bureaucratic and also policy and legal hurdles that need to be taken, where it would be important to identify what can be done to facilitate the recognition of the qualifications so that people can actually access the labor market in the area of employment where they would want to access the labor market, and not in a lower skilled job, for example. I think another example, maybe from my previous life before UNHCR, working as actually as a social worker for the German Red Cross. There I would also see that often there is a need for specific work in specific areas, and then this is often being offered to refugees, especially if you look, for example, care work at hospitals or elderly homes, that this is where really there is a need for more workers, but this is not necessarily what fits the qualifications or also the interests of people who have arrived, in particular, from my perspective, speaking about refugees. So I think there's a bit of there might be some kind of a mismatch between what are the needs and what is the actual interests, and to see how to be able to match these, to also provide access to the labor market in the areas where people would be interested to work, but at the same time to also meet the labor market needs. And this can, like I said, especially when it comes to recognition of qualifications, this is often even a legal or policy question, to be able to facilitate these processes. On the platforms, the ideal person to answer this question would have been Nada, but I think you already spoke with her last week. But she sent me a little bit of information on it that I will put in the chat for you. Maybe that will be helpful for you. So I understand that these platforms, employment platforms, are mostly focused on Europe and Latin America, and that they are basically the intention is to help refugees access the labor market through making these jobs available. But I would have to see what I can provide for you on that one.
Thank you so much to both of you. Emily, I've seen you have written in the chat, but you might want to take the floor also for a minute, because there is an interesting information there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks Denise and Héloise for the very detailed presentation, and also Anna, I think the question and comment is very interesting. I mean, maybe first, I just wrote in the chat because I'm from Switzerland, and I know that sometimes like countries have like national policies to kind of prioritize nationals in the labor market. I know in Switzerland, usually in very high skilled job, you need to justify if you want to take foreign person, especially outside of Europe. And it's already something like that can be a challenge for migrants. I can imagine that for refugees, it's even more difficult. And I was just wondering, because it's more like a general comments on the discussion, that I see all the work that is done to try to advocate for countries to change policies and being inclusive, but also think that sometimes there is very strong national policies that are very difficult to modify, and I'm not sure what's the best approach to ease the inclusion of high skill workers. that was just a comment. I don't know if you want to answer on this, but I also had a small question on the presentation of Héloise, if I can. You talk about the impact of displaced person on the labor market, which I think is very interesting, that we can see the different challenges, but also what displaced person can bring like positive impact on labor markets. And you mentioned, for example, that they can bring new skills or like fill some skill gap or labor gaps. And I was just wondering if you have maybe just a few other like example of positive impacts that we could use maybe for advocacy, because we know that sometimes at country level there is this kind of stereotype or discrimination, thinking that if we like that they will steal job or other things. That is kind of a risk sometimes to include all of these people in the labor market. And I was just wondering if you have a few other evidence or like example that we could use maybe to highlight the positive impact of displaced person in the labor market. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, I think on your first point about this question that many host countries will prioritize their nationals, whether implicitly or explicitly. I think that's a very important trend to note, and in part it is also a response to Anna's point. I mean, you mentioned the Swiss legislations, but many countries in their policy, would apply quotas, and they can. And here I'm thinking about Turkey, where you already need to have a certain number of nationals before being able to consider hiring refugees, and I think there are several examples like that. So on the positive impact of refugees, I think this is really something that's very much in demand, and it's to kind of counter the negative discourse and the xenophobic discourse that is often taking place in forced displacement contexts, or where you have large number of displaced people. I think it's an area where also UNHCR, the World Bank, have also been looking into that. One dimension, and if I don't know whether you attended the session with Roger and Nada last week, but they did refer to I think it was Brazil, where they could, because there is a big demand also to show the added value from an economic dimension. A lot of the discourse is, yes, it's the taking the jobs, but it's also it's costing. It's a burden on the services. It's a burden on the economy, and I think there's really a big demand to and to show evidence that it's, yes, there may be a shock, but usually with time and as refugees, the more refugee enter the labor market, the more they can contribute, then the impact become positive. Unless you have scenarios, and I think in this case Lebanon is interesting because I think you had large numbers to start with. The economy was weak to start with, but then it did not improve. It got even worse, and that's where you had the negative discourse, which became even stronger. So of course, it's, the impact of refugees, you need to look at it very much linked to how the actual economy will evolve, regardless. So you really need to look at the big picture. So yeah, I'm thinking of Brazil. Denise, do you have more example? I'm actually wondering about Remap and whether through the database we're able to also capture some of those more positive trends, and also so they're not just anecdotal, because we could think of a few countries here and there, but just more solid evidence. And I think also probably over time, as we said, depending on the type of displacement, people can be displaced for a long time. So you do need that. I think you do. You probably can't just do a snapshot study. You probably need to look at it over years. So you start with an initial assessment, and then you probably need to assess the situation afterwards. And it's very much when I presented some of the challenges that refugee did, that's very much what we did with the prospect study on the looking at laws and policies. They wanted to do a study at one point, and then also see how the work of organizations, the advocacy work, the capacity building work, the operational, very specific project is making an impact over time on policy, on laws and policies. But over to Denise for maybe more thoughts or example.
Thanks so much. Yes, actually, UNHCR has compiled some studies that show the positive impact that refugees can have on the economy, or that integrating refugees can have on the economy. I would just check if I can share that with you. I think it was an internal document, but we might be able to make this available. And it's basically a collection of several studies that show this impact. And like you said, I think Brazil is one of the prominent examples, but there was also a study, I think, done by the IMF that said that it basically made a calculation which could be the positive impact that Venezuelan refugees and migrants in Latin America could have on the GDP of the host countries if they were included in the labor market. There's also some studies, I think, from Germany available to show the possible positive impact of including refugees and a few others. So let me just check that, and then maybe I'll reach out to you after the course and to share this information.
Thank you, Denise. We will add it to the eCampus then. So I think we should take Ashna, because she's raising her hands.
Hello, yeah, thank you so much. So thank you for the presentation. You've both given a wonderful presentation, and it was very detailed, of course. So in both the presentations, we have highlighted the efforts of UNHCR and ILO in terms of decent work. So as you know, I come from Nepal, a very small economy. In principle, I think it is clear, but in terms of implementation, it is very difficult. Not because of the commitment, but lack of efficiency of the state. So I have a question, like if you could highlight some capacity building program in decent work of UNHCR and ILO for least developed country to enhance their efficiency in order to make them able to participate in global forum. If you could just give me some, details about the UNHCR and ILO's efforts.
That's a big question. No, I think the addressing some of the structural weaknesses and the capacity building element is very much a strong component of of ILO's mandate and this longer term approach that you need. I mean, I think first it's very important to observe what kind of weaknesses or lack of capacity are we talking about? Because sometimes it's more lack of political will, which it can either be that, or it can be combined with a genuine lack of capacities. I mean, some ministries are underfunded, weaker. They may not have the staff who would have a clear understanding about the rights of certain workers, migrant workers, refugees. The legislations can be complex because you have the international legislative framework, but then how is it applied and how is it implemented in the country is another story. So I think there is capacity of I mean, the ILO is a tripartite organization, so for us there would be the dimension of the capacity of the government side. Usually our counterpart is the Ministry of Labor, can be Ministry of Labor, Social Protection. But very, very important in this context is that it needs to be a whole of government approach. So usually it's not sufficient to just tackle one ministry. UNHCR may usually have a different counterpart because the national refugee legislation is, if there is one, would not be dealt by the Ministry of Labor. So usually by working together, by joining forces, we're bringing those different ministries together, and this is where we can then usually gradually see progress. And then I mentioned the fact that we are a tripartite organization. So as was mentioned in the session last year, the majority of jobs would be provided by the private sector. So very important to engage with the employers. And also I mentioned earlier in my presentation, in some contexts, the lack of engagement from trade unions, but often there is a will, but there can be a whole range of reason as to why they're not sufficiently involved. There can be a political component with earlier we mentioned the often the priorities given to nationals. It can be the same for the work of trade unions. Usually if they have weak capacity, they may give priorities to their nationals before thinking about the refugees. So it is really work in progress. Also, I'm thinking, very important to strengthen the capacity of labor inspectors to address some of the decent work deficit. I mean, that's all part of the building capacity. So I think the government is one thing, but then I think it's really good to look at the country context, because you may have some governments that, and I think that was, can't remember if it was Nada or Roger's point, they would come to forum and announce certain good intentions, but the reality at a more local level in a camp or even in some urban setting, the daily reality for refugees would be very different. This is why the session next week will be really interesting, because we are going to hear from the refugees' perspective. But over to Denise to respond to some of that.
Thanks. Yeah, just maybe to add to this, and actually not so much to add. I think on a specific country context, it's very important to look at the legal framework that applies, and also the specificities of that country and what is the situation in that country. So as UNHCR, we have of course in presence in most countries, I would say. I think there are 130, if I'm not mistaken, roundabout. And also in collaboration with our regional bureaus, are usually the best placed to who have a best understanding of the national framework, and what would need to be done. For example, like where are the gaps, or where maybe also some of the opportunities where work with the government, but also with the civil society in the country can be effective to address very specific challenges. And some of these challenges sometimes might even be, an issue with, let's say, a policy, for example, that prevents or doesn't allow refugees to open bank accounts, for example, or to access financial services, or there might be an issue with the recognition of the identity documents that are available for refugees. It might be very relatively small but practical issues that could be unlocked through identifying these kind of challenges in a country, a situation, and that could then have quite a big impact. And sometimes for these, like, let's say, smaller law and policy changes, the political will might not be as much of an issue as, for example, having a completely new asylum law or something like this. Like sometimes it can have a large impact to identify these challenges and to address them specifically. And I think the Global Refugee Forum, just to think of also a bit bigger, is a great opportunity for different countries that are maybe not usually the main refugee hosting countries or the main donor countries, but to also come in and to play a part and to be involved and actively involved in the multi-stakeholder pledges, for example. So yeah, I think there is space there also for civil society, local civil society, like not only the big organizations, to come in and play a part and make contributions to these pledges as well, and to find some support within these structures of the multi-stakeholder pledges as well, because in the end, many of them form some kind of groups that support these, that are supportive of this specific area. So that it also creates a network and some joint action on it. I see Anna also has her hand raised.
Yes, if I may quickly just also respond to the comment of Emily, and to the thank you very much for the answers of you, Denise, and of Héloise on my question. So just very quickly that, of course, those high qualified refugees, they are facing all these legal obstacles like the recognition of qualifications, and of course they cannot be recognized as high qualified without this. And of course, what Emily mentioned, this competition from other migrants and of course from the local people. But just if to think how to help, I agree with you that the best is really to facilitate this multi-stakeholder dialogue, also access to the private sector, so talk to the employers, to real employers, because they are those who provide the jobs. And of course there should be the political will to help, but I would say that there should be also the political possibility to help, because even if to compare two cantons of Switzerland like Bern and Geneva, when I talk to them, so that's completely different how they can approach stakeholders. And for example, I'm based in Bern, and I talked to the person in the municipality who is responsible for the quality of work, and for example, she told me that this is not possible to approach in Bern the employers, because just of the liberal policy, so this is just not so they should take the decision on their own, and therefore they are, I would say, not even aware of the fact who are those refugees, what qualifications they have, and therefore at this stage I would say this possibility of collaboration breaks. So this is one of the things. Another thing is that there are a lot of also private initiatives created to help refugees. I'm speaking now about high qualified refugees to integrate into the labor market. And so during these general trainings, of course, so they provide and they say so that everything is possible through the networking. But then just with the networking, for example, the social service doesn't support this even with the transport cost for the refugees, because they say, oh no, this is not essential cost, that so we can cover just your travel to the doctor. And also what I observe, for example, in Switzerland, there is unemployment office and there is also the social service, and they are not collaborating even now when I'm trying really to connect them. So it's just not possible. They are not starting to communicate. And I would say that this is not only because they don't have the desire, they also don't have capacity, because they are understaffed, so like every person has a lot of responsibilities, and then there should be, I don't know, some other institutions or some other involvement, like how to facilitate also those connections and how to address those existing gaps, that like the advice that is provided actually to the refugees so is not possible to implement in practice, both by refugees and by certain organizations. So thank you very much, and sorry for taking time.
Thank you. I think we need to wrap up, Héloise and Denise, because a lot of participants had to leave already. And also for you, we've been running a lot of our time. It's very interesting session, lots of questions as you can see. So if you want to say final words.
No, just to say thank you so much. And Anna, I think really keep all those really interesting points, and please attend the session next week, because as I said, we will focus on refugees, meaningful participation, and I think all the ideas you have will be very much welcome in taking part in the webinar later this week. Big thank you to Denise, Marion, all the participants. It was great to have this discussion with you all.
Thank you, Héloise. Denise, do you have a final word?
Yes, also just thanks from my side. It's always super interesting to participate in this course and to also hear the experience from participants, and to learn and to get also a bit of a reality check, since I'm working mostly on legal questions. It's always very enriching for me to hear the perspectives from the participants as well, and the challenges on the ground. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you to both of you for your availability, to Héloise also, who was behind the scene. Thank you for the participants who stayed so long. Also, next session will be this Thursday at 2 p.m. Keep posted. We will go on, and it will be a refugee-led organizations presentation by we already have we have 3 different persons presenting, so it will be very, very interesting. We will share all these resources on the campus. Thank you again, Héloise, Denise, and Eliza, and to all the participants.
Bye bye, everyone.
Bye bye. Thanks.